Some timelines create heroes, but in this one, Mark Grayson unlocked his Viltrumite powers too early, before he understood right from wrong, before anyone could guide him. This is how a Mark variant erased humanity and became a legend the Empire feared. Didn't start with a game, started with a crater. At just 10 years old, Mark wasn't playing tag. He was defending himself from a bully. One shove, and half the schoolyard was gone. The news called it a gas explosion. His mother called it a miracle he survived, but OMNI-Man knew exactly what had happened. Mark had awakened his Viltrumite powers. Years too early, without a clue of what he was. No sense of control, no understanding of consequences. And unlike the main timeline, there were no evenings spent dreaming of being a hero. There was only fear and raw power waiting to be shaped, without human values to anchor him. What stopped this young Viltrumite from becoming Earth's greatest threat? Nolan wasn't about to wait for that answer. Nolan didn't hesitate. This wasn't the time for fatherly speeches or baseball games. The moment Mark's powers erupted, OMNI-Man contacted the Viltrumite Empire. Why conquer Earth alone when he now had a weapon far more dangerous? A young, impressionable Viltrumite with no moral compass. The Guardians didn't get a chance to suspect anything. They were eliminated before sunrise. But Nolan didn't stop there. He didn't just train Mark to take Earth. He prepared him for something far greater. Galactic conquest. By the time the GDA realized what was happening, Nolan and Mark weren't hiding. They were broadcasting their message to the world. Earth was no longer independent. It was phase 1 of a much larger campaign, and this wasn't unique. In the vast timelines of the multiverse, Viltrumites had seen potential like this before, but never had a child variant risen this quickly. A Mark Grayson with no ties to humanity, a Mark destined to become more than a soldier, a symbol of Viltrumite supremacy. And Nolan? He wasn't raising a son anymore. He was forging a conqueror. The world didn't watch Mark Grayson grow into Invincible. It watched him become something far worse. The day 5 cities vanished overnight, humanity realized this wasn't a hero in the making. This was a weapon unleashed. Mark didn't earn a name through victories. He was branded by the Viltrumite Empire, the young conqueror. Earth wasn't his battlefield. It was his first lesson. Every resistance crushed, every broadcasted execution was part of his training. Without Mark's interference, D.A. Sinclair never built his monsters. Cecil never found weaknesses. There were no secret weapons. No last stands. Could the Immortal or Black Samson have changed that? Some believe they could delay the inevitable, but against a child bred for dominance, delay was all they had. The Viltrumites didn't see Mark as a prodigy, they saw him as the perfect product of early conquest indoctrination. And across galaxies, when planets heard his name, they didn't prepare for battle, they surrendered. Mark wasn't feared because of his power alone. He was feared because he had nothing left of humanity to hold him back. In the multiverse, this variant didn't fall from grace. He never knew it. Earth's fall was just the beginning. It wasn't just Earth that fell without a fight. The Flaxen worlds surrendered before Mark ever set foot on their soil. The Sequids tried to resist. For a week, their hive mind launched wave after wave of biological weapons. But against Mark, indoctrinated and merciless, they didn't stand a chance. Even the coalition of planets debated whether intervention was worth the cost. A child Viltrumite leading conquests wasn't just unprecedented, was terrifying. By the time Mark reached his mid-teens, the galaxy knew his face. Where his shadow fell, resistance evaporated. Earth didn't burn. It surrendered. Cities still stood, but flags were replaced with Viltrumite symbols. Skies once filled with satellites now carried warships. There were no presidents, no parliaments, only silence and compliance. Mark wasn't a ruler. He was a reminder. Every building, every broadcast showed his image, the child who crushed rebellion before it began. To the Viltrumite Empire, Earth was a success story, proof that early conquest worked flawlessly. But beneath the surface, whispers remained. Small pockets of resistance, memories of freedom, and Mark. For the first time in years, he found himself pausing during an execution, not out of mercy, but because something felt familiar. A face in the crowd, a voice that sounded too much like his mother's. The strongest weapon the Empire had ever created began to hesitate. Weapons aren't supposed to hesitate, but Mark did. It wasn't during a battle, it was in the aftermath, standing over a defeated resistance cell on a distant world. Among the rubble, a child stared at him. not with fear, but with confusion, just like he once looked at OMNI-Man. That glance cracked something buried deep beneath Viltrumite conditioning, a memory he didn't know he still had. His mother's voice, her smile, a name he hadn't heard spoken in years, Mark. The Empire called him Conqueror. OMNI-Man called him Perfect. But for the first time, he wondered who he really was. He didn't speak of it, not to Nolan, not to anyone, because in Viltrumite culture, doubt was a death sentence. Yet as silence filled the galaxy under his rule, Mark realized something terrifying. He had won, and he felt nothing. Conquest wasn't victory. It was emptiness. Days before the Enforcer's arrival, Mark witnessed something that unsettled him more than any battle. A fellow Viltrumite executed his own subordinate for hesitating. That night, Mark dreamt, not of conquest, but of a simpler time. Debbie, home, humanity. When he woke, that memory felt more alien than any world he'd conquered. Yet it was his. The Viltrumite Empire doesn't send invitations. They send judgment. When Mark received word that 3 high-ranking enforcers were en route to Earth, he knew what it meant. They weren't coming to congratulate him. They were coming to purge weakness. Nolan tried to reassure him. Show them strength, and they'll leave satisfied. But Mark wasn't convinced. Not after what he found beneath the ruins of a forgotten GDA facility, his mother, alive but broken. Seeing her didn't make him weak. It made him aware. The Empire wasn't just coming to evaluate Earth's conquest. They were coming to decide if Mark Grayson was still Viltrumite enough to survive. The moment the Viltrumite enforcers arrived, they didn't ask questions. They gave orders. Cold, absolute. Eliminate the weakness. Start with the human woman. The air grew heavier. Even among conquerors, there was a sense of finality. Mark stood silent, not out of fear, but calculation. His gaze didn't waver as Nolan's eyes locked onto his, delivering a silent ultimatum: compliance or extinction. Footsteps echoed through the corridor as the enforcers advanced toward Debbie's cell. Every step was a countdown. Mark never intended to let reach 0, but what surged within him wasn't rage, it wasn't rebellion, it was clarity, the kind that only comes when you realize you're done being someone else's weapon. Mark didn't speak, he moved. In less than a heartbeat, the first enforcer's head was severed, crashing against the steel floor. The sound of defiance made flesh. The remaining 2 froze, processing the impossible. For the first time in his life, Mark Grayson wasn't following Viltrumite orders. He wasn't following his father. He was following something far more dangerous to the Empire: his own will. The next move wouldn't just decide Earth's fate. It would echo across the Empire. Would Nolan stand with his son, or with his creators? Would the Empire crush this uprising, or unleash a threat they could never contain? But that is a story for another timeline. What do you think happens next? Could Mark survive defying the most powerful empire in the galaxy? Would he spark a war, or something even darker? Let me know your theories in the comments. I read them all, and if you want to see how deep this dark timeline really goes, subscribe, and stay tuned for more twisted multiverse stories. This variant story, it's only just begun.